road. And that's Time Saver Traffic and Weather. And here's Dave.
All right, Tom, thank you. Today, the city of San Luis Obispo has declared it as being KVEC 920 Day. So we're spending the whole show just marking our 75th anniversary. Bill Benica is going to join us a little bit. Anna Scott's going to join us. King Harris, Connie Gordon, Susan Vaughn. Dean Opperman will be back with us. And who knows who's going to call in. But we're going to jump. Thanks again to Russ James and Bob Brown for coming by and talking a little bit about the early days. And we're going to be jumping all around the time frame during these 4 hours. Up next, Jim Zim is here. Those of you who listened to KVEC in the 1980s may remember him as Jim Allen. He's here now. Jim, nice to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Hi, Dave. Nice to see you. We actually did meet once before at Benica's 50th birthday party.
Was I nice to you?
You were very, very nice.
Oh, that was at in
Port San Luis.
Port San Luis, upstairs.
Yes.
I probably wasn't sober.
You were nice, and you made a big impression on me, and I know I made no impression on you, and I didn't expect it.
Why did you? Why were you Jim Allen? Why? Because your real name's not Zim. It's short, but why weren't you just Jim Zim?
My last name is Jim. My last name is Zimmerlin, and I didn't think that was a good radio name.
Yeah, I get that, but Jim Zim would be perfect.
I didn't figure that out until later in my career.
Really?
I thought a better radio name was Jim Allen, so I went by Jim Allen for a while. And then later, finally, like around 1990, I finally figured out you should just go by what everybody calls you, which is Jim Zim. But in my KVEC days, it was Jim Allen.
And what exactly were your KVEC days? When did you start?
All right, well, I started around 1979, I think. I worked at 79, 80, 81. Right. I started at night, fresh out of college, out of KCPR at Cal Poly.
Right.
And
where were you from originally?
Up in the Bay Area.
Okay.
Yeah. So I grew up listening to Bay Area radio, and I got interested in radio at Cal Poly. But I was really, really green.
Yeah.
But there was a girl that worked at the Cal Poly station that had a weekend gig on KVEC, and she convinced me I was good enough. Yeah. So I put a tape together, and she passed it along, or I mailed it in or something, to KVEC, and they needed a nighttime jock to work from 7 to midnight, and a lot of nights that was just tending the Dodger broadcast. Right. But some nights I got to play music and be a real DJ.
So you were live?
It was live, and, you know, that was before the station went to all talk. Yeah. So, you know, it was like being a regular DJ. I was playing, in those days, it was John Denver and Neil Diamond and Anne Murray and that kind of stuff. And, you know, very middle of the road. Yeah. And I did my thing, and I like to tell little short, very short stories about what was happening in my life. So if funny things happened, I'd go on the air with it.
Where was the station located? Was that on Walnut?
Yeah, that was Walnut and Choro in those days. And it was kind of a dive. You know that...
Not like the corporate mecca we're in right now.
See, radio stations, when they sell, you know, a new owner a lot of times will come in and build a showpiece of a station like this. And then it's going to be years and years and years before you get any new equipment after that, right? Well, KVEC at the point when I worked for them, you know, it had been a long time since they had much new equipment there.
Who was the manager?
It was Dan Clarkson was the manager, and Bill Benica was the program director, so it was really Benica that hired me.
Tell me a story about Bill Benica.
I just love him. I love him to this day. He was a great guy to work for. He was funny as heck. Yeah. You know, he was going through a lot at that time. He was going through a divorce back in those days, so I'm sure it was...
How many times has that guy been married?
You ask him. So it wasn't the greatest time in his life, I'm sure, but he was a great boss and a great on-air personality and a great program director.
Well, we just had Bob Brown here, and it sounds like KVC early on was doing everything. I mean, high school games and professional games.
There was a lot of sports. There was too much.
Full news team, that kind of stuff.
Too much sports in those days. But they they were really big on news. I mean, it was a serious news organization. Yeah. Although, you know, small, not like a TV station.
We'll define small, because now we got one guy.
There was more than one guy. There was one main guy, you know, and then they had some other people. But there was one guy, his name, in my era, around 1980, was Mike Powell, was KVEC News. Yeah. And he was a serious newsman, and he did a great job.
This guy.
Let's see, Mike Powell.
Because that's Bill Benica. You know, this guy showed up and said, that's Mike Powell and Bill Benica.
I see Benica. Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah, right. He's doing like a basketball game or something.
Yeah.
And the thing about Powell, he was a great newsman, but he had a temper. He was hard to work for.
Right.
And he would do the morning news block. And by that point in my career, I was on in the mornings, and I was basically engineering the morning show. So I was starting all the, tape segments and stuff, and every now and then, I would screw up, and I would miss a cue or whatever, and oh boy, he would get really, really mad. He would throw things.
Does that remind you of anybody, Tom?
Oh, yes, it does.
Oh, does that remind you of anybody? So he'd throw a pen at the window?
He would throw a chair.
Okay, well.
Or, yeah.
I'm not thinking of you. I'm thinking of a couple of news directors we had here.
I'm thinking of me.
Threw chairs and everything.
Powell was difficult. Benica was great. Benica was just the nicest guy.
Jim Zim on this broadcast. So who was the competition in those days?
Well, there was KATY and there was K-Sly. There weren't that many stations, nowhere near as many stations in the market then as there are now.
Right.
So it was more well-defined. Everybody had their little niche. K-Sly did their top 40 thing, and KVEC was middle-of-the-road music with a lot of news and a lot of sports.
Yeah.
And we were very, very popular. I mean people really listened.
Were we still the #1 station?
Number one is a funny thing because are you talking about 18 to 49 or all people or just adults or what? But, the station was doing really well. They were making money. You'd say something on the air and you'd go to talk to somebody the next day and they heard it.
See, I've been doing this for 20 years, but I've never, ever been a music DJ.
Right.
So it must have been cool to be able to play records and take phone calls and people calling in, and you can't do that today because it's all voice track.
That was my thing. I really was a music DJ. I didn't really care about the news or anything like that. I came from a whole music thing, and so eventually I worked my way up in KVEC and I became the music director. Okay. And that's when I just started to have the best time because there's perks for a music director. First off, you get all these free albums from the record companies. You get concert tickets. I got to see Barbara Mandrell in concert, for free. The best one was the Bee Gees at Dodger Stadium at the peak of their career, around 1980, going down for free, sitting up in the booth by where Vin Scully sits, and watching the Bee Gees, and 40,000 people just screaming, going nuts.
Wait, was it all local in those days, Jim?
Other than like the Dodger broadcasts and stuff like that.
But the music shows, everything was local.
Oh, all the music was local, yeah. And we were playing 45s and, some albums. It certainly wasn't like today it would be on a, computer disc or whatever. And
did you go out and do live remotes and, hey, come on down to Bob's Furniture Store?
There was some, not me. I never went out. I was just in the studio all the time.
How'd you get away with that? How come you never got to do remotes?
I guess there were other guys that did that, and like Benica, he loved that stuff. Benica's a people guy.
Yeah.
He likes to get out there at the grocery stores and.
Oh, so you're one of those shy radio guys, and you get behind a microphone, the personality comes out. You're like me.
That's right. Exactly. I think we are actually very, very much alike. And when I listen to you, I see how my life, could have gone if I had taken one path. I went a different way, but anyway.
I think you ended up just fine. So how long were you at KVEC?
It was about 3 years on KVEC.
Then did you go on to another radio station after that?
Right after KVEC, moved up to the Bay Area, and I had illusions of grandeur. I thought, I'm just going to move up to the Bay Area, and I'm going to take whatever low job I can get at any station. I'll do anything, and I'll work my way up, and they'll see my brilliance. And it didn't end up working out that way. I ended up, after a while, I just couldn't get a job in radio in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And I took a job that I could get, which was working for, it was like Best Buy, the Bay Area's Best Buy at the time. And I ended up becoming a TV and VCR salesman, and I made a ton of money at it. And that's when I started to realize, you know what they say about the difference between a radio announcer and a pepperoni pizza.
What's the difference between a radio announcer and a pepperoni pizza?
A pepperoni pizza can feed a family of 4. They're not going to happen in radio. So I had
try doing that today.
Yeah, I know.
Try doing that today.
It's just like it.
Jim Zim on this broadcast. We're talking a little bit about KVEC back in the 80s. We'll continue that conversation straight ahead on News Talk 920 KVEC.
Hello, I'm Bob.
421, you have landed on the Dave Congalton Show, always your hometown radio talk show. On your station, that's always your hometown radio station. We are KVEC. And today we're spending the entire show marking 75 years of service to the community. We are the oldest radio station on the Central Coast. So I've invited some of the folks who made KVEC happen over the years to come join us in studio. And we are chatting with Jim Zim, who back in the 80s was Jim Allen, particularly in the early 80s, working with Anna Scott, who's going to join us shortly, and Bill Benica. Dan, talk to me about Dan Clarkson, because the Dan Clarkson I knew later in life.
Yeah, I actually didn't work very closely with him. He was mainly, his focus was on the sales staff,
right?
Not on the on-air staff.
He didn't have much to do with you guys.
Not so much with me. He worked real closely with Benica, because Benica was program director.
Yeah.
Not so much with me.
There was a very strong bond between those two guys.
Yeah, they were good at what they did.
And talk about doing live radio. What was that like? I bet there are a lot of mistakes.
I enjoyed it very much, but oh gosh, yeah, there's mistakes that I remember as clear as a bell today, 20, 30 years later. I was really, really green when I hired on straight out of Cal Poly and came to KVEC, and I had lived a very sheltered existence. I was not a man of the world when I started at KVEC. We talk about diversity now. I grew up in the least diverse, like an Ozzie and Harriet world, right? So, I did not go to school with any blacks or Mexicans or gays or anything like that. So now I'm an announcer on KVEC, and I'm reading news articles, and I read this news article from the Associated Press on the air, and it's about a guy named Mr. Martinez who had committed some kind of crime. And Mr. Martinez's first name is spelled J-E-S-U-S. And I read the story on the air about the crime committed by Jesus Martinez. It just never occurred to me that the guy's name was Jesus. Right? That was how green I was in those days. It's embarrassing. So, and then there was a lot of stuff like, we played records in those days. And
did you have the choice, though, to play what you wanted to play?
Yes.
Was it freeform?
Yeah, it was
free. Or was Benica cracking the whip saying, you play this, you play that?
There was just a little bit of, you played a current hit every so often, like at the 20 minutes past or whatever. You played a current song, and then, you filled in all around that with older songs or whatever. But, when you're playing records on the air, there's always that risk that somebody's going to knock the tone arm, and it goes right across. And that only happened a dozen times. My father knocked a tone arm across a record while I was live on the air.
And was management listening while you were on air? If you screwed up, did you get the call the next day? Or, hey, what's going on there? Don't make me come down there?
I never heard anything from Clarkson. Benica would say something. There was one, oh gosh, it was the worst thing that I ever did on KVEC, and I still feel bad about it to this day. And there was a look that Benica gave me.
Well, what'd you do?
All right, we had this news block at noon, and as part of the news block, there was a interview segment that was usually 5 or 10 minutes, and it was about things happening in the community. It was like a lot of the stuff that you do on the air.
Right.
Somebody the little theater is doing a play, and they come on to plug it.
Right.
So it was about a 5 or 10 minute, and Benica asked me to host it for a while.
Right.
Just because, he had enough going on and he needed somebody to do it. So it wasn't my thing. I wasn't into it.
Right.
But I did it, and, I interviewed these people that came in, and it was actually on a cassette tape.
There was nobody named Jesus coming in,
Nobody
was there?
named Jesus.
Okay.
This lady was coming in from the little theater, and she was plugging their latest production, and she's talking on and on. And it was on tape. It was not live on the air.
Right.
So it's all pre-taped, and she's talking about this show that they're doing, and it was like an intriguing mystery kind of thing. And the thought came to my head that it sounded a little bit like the movie at the time that was big called Body Heat.
I remember that.
So I wanted to make a parallel between how the mystery of this play that they were putting on and the great movie I had just seen called Body Heat, except for I could not remember the name of the movie.
Right.
So I was trying to make this point, but I kept saying, I can't remember what the movie was called.
Right.
And this went on, me trying to recall the name of the movie, for about 3 or 4 minutes on tape. And then I finally said to the lady, I'll cut that out in post-production. It'll sound good when it gets on the air. And then when it was all done, I just kind of wanted to go to the beach that day, and I wasn't into it. So I just gave Benica the tape as is. And it ran on the air.
Probably not a good move.
Not a good move. And it ran on the air me like 3 or 4 minutes trying to remember the name of the movie Body Heat. And I happened to walk through the studio when Bill was playing it on the air. And the look he shot me was just deadly to this day.
George is in San Luis on KVEC. Hey, George.
Hey, gang, and happy anniversary to you.
Thank you, George.
I was going to say a couple of people I remember. Sunday morning, there used to be a DJ that came on and played country and western music. He called himself Mac the Scotch Hillbilly.
Yeah, we were talking about him last hour. The guy's a classic.
Okay.
Did you ever meet Mac the Scotch Hillbilly, Jim?
I did not. No, that was long before my time. He was way gone by the time, 1980 rolled around.
That was about in the mid-'60s.
Yeah.
And another guy was named Howard Foster. That was probably 63, 4, 5, somewhere around that time.
I did, in the 80s, I was still hearing about the weekend, country show.
I mean, when you guys were at the station, George, thanks to the memory, did you know much about the history of the station?
I knew a little bit about it. I mean, I enjoyed listening to your last hour. It filled in a lot of blanks, in the story for me. That was great. But, they were very well aware of their historic position in the city and county at that point.
George, thanks for the call. I mean, what does it mean to you today as you look back on your radio career, the fact that you spent some time at KVEC? Does it mean anything special to you?
It was fun, and I still like listening to KVEC, these days. And it's just really good memories of those times. And especially working with Bill. He was a great boss and a great person.
I mean, do you owe him money? I mean, 30 years later, you're still sucking up to the guy. Do you owe him money?
No, there's some
Does he have one of your kids?
There's some people you work with, you have a great time working with them, and there's some people you work with, you never want to see them again.
You ever have groupies?
There was a couple of girls, yeah. I mean, I can get away with saying this because this was long before I met the lady who became my wife.
You may not want to say these stories on the air. She might be listening.
Yeah, there was a couple of girls. It wasn't groupies like, the movie Almost Famous. That's a real groupie in my mind. But there was girls that called in. There was one that called in a lot, and I finally went to meet her. This is a classic Jim Zim scenario. I go to meet this girl who was, hitting on me on the phone, and she's got like Down syndrome, and ended up having to call the police because she kept calling my home at 2 in the morning after that.
Well, it's okay. Now, these days, Tom and I, we have Marilyn. She's always calling us.
Our groupies are wonderful.
We've got great groupies.
We do.
So it sounds like you had a great time at KVEC.
I enjoyed it very, very much. And if there was money to be made as a radio announcer, I would still be doing it today.
Money? Radio? I don't know about that. Jim, we appreciate you being part of the 75th anniversary celebration. Final thoughts about KVEC?
It was a great time in my life, and also the time when I met the woman who became my wife. There was a lot of fun stuff that happened. I wooed her with a free Kenny Rogers calendar that I'd been given by the record company, and
lots of the big spenders. There's a free calendar.
It seemed to work 30 years later.
Wow, I'm really impressed now, Jim.
Wow. Wow. All right, Jim, thanks so much. Off to news we go. Traffic. Anna Scott up next as we continue. 75 years celebration of KVEC. Stick around.
Hometown radio station, 920 KVEC San Luis Obispo. Proud to be owned and operated by Eldorado Broadcasters.
California headline.